Hello, everybody. Welcome to Titles Hardcore Media. Bringing you another video here. Drone bill blocked by Rand Paul. Um, Concerning drone usage, where law enforcement would go through all of our drones, see everything that we're doing on it, etc. This is about privacy. Glad he did it. Um, let's get into this. What was it on News Nation here? And then go into pretty much what Rand Paul said. And Schumer, the idiot here. Anyways, leave a comment, leave a like. Uh,
for defense1.com, Patrick Tucker. Joining me now, I have technology editor for defense1.com, Patrick Tucker. Pat, thanks for hopping on with me. I mean, you write about science and
we are going to go into Lou Elizondo, too, from Project A-Tip. Stuff like that, what he's had to say about this issue as we did yesterday. So
tech, that's your bread and butter. So what's your gut check about what's going on here?
Well, this bill, it's identical to a 2023 bill safeguarding the homeland from the threats posed by Unmanned Aircraft Systems Act of 2023. What it would have done is establish a pilot program so that law enforcement has jurisdiction to essentially take these drones out of the sky as needed, either by hijacking the signal between the drone and the operator, allowing law enforcement to steer the drone somewhere else, or blocking the signal so the drone basically crashes to the ground. That bill was supported by the Chamber of Commerce, very wide support, but didn't get anywhere. Senator Pohl says that what this bill would allow is government surveillance of private communications because, of course, operators use cellular frequencies to communicate with drones, to get live feed from the cameras, etc. So it really speaks to the fact
those are not the only places drones, UFOs are being seen. But anyways, let's
that there are a lot of legal and domestic policy hurdles that stand in the way of an effective U.S. government law enforcement domestic agency response to this. Those are barriers that don't exist when the U.S. military has to defend bases from drones, either in the United States or other countries.
Yeah, and you just wrote a piece on that, right? I mean, because I think a lot of Americans are thinking to themselves, how are we not shooting these out of the sky right now? And you pointed it out in your most recent piece that America has the tools to take it down, but not the policy. In your eyes, does the policy need to be updated to keep up with the pace of this technology?
Well, I think that is the consensus of a lot of different folks, including businesses, because these drones have become incredibly disruptive. And there are a lot of safe ways to generally take them out of the sky or interrupt them and remove them safely. The absence of any legislation or policy change to allow the government to do that could lead to very unsafe situations where people are taking it upon themselves to attempt to remove these things using shotguns or rifles or whatever they have around. That's potentially far more unsafe. There are real questions about how to expand surveillance powers to law enforcement to allow them to take down these drones. But that seems to be something that could conceivably be handled.
And again, some of these are drones, some of them are not.
Handled and be part of the legislation. So it seems like it could be a good idea. There's certainly a lot of support for it. The absence of it could increase risks to public safety.
What camp are you in, Pat? I mean, are you in the camp that believes the government knows more than they're letting on, especially after talking to sources for your stories? Where do you stand?
Well, the government so far on this has been pretty straightforward about what they think of most of these things are. There are some instances where there might be something that hasn't been disclosed to the public. They chose a classified setting to have a briefing with the Senate the other day. But for the most part, we know these things aren't Chinese or Russian or Iranian, because otherwise the Defense Department would be in charge of taking them down, as they were with the Chinese drone that we.
But do we know that? Do you feel certain in that? that it's not at the hands of a foreign adversary?
I do. When you put the United States military in charge of something, they really like everybody to know that they're in charge, and they like to do a little bit better job than this. So we do know that in part because of the fact that the Defense Department isn't in charge of handling the situation. There's legislation now to speed efforts to and new capabilities and authorities to law enforcement. So it seems like that's probably the case. And if you look at the tips that have come in,
Yeah, there's a huge difference between orbs, UFOs, and drones. I mean, I'm not sitting right there seeing it myself, but there's a huge difference between solid lights and drones that have FAA lights and even UFOs that have use different types of lights as well. There's a huge difference between the two.
The vast majority of them really are drone sightings that are domestic. Sometimes people reporting on law enforcement drones. Sometimes people reporting on airplanes. Sometimes people reporting on airplanes that are or coming in via flight paths. Sometimes reporting on stars. So I'm not surprised at all that this is a reoccurring phenomenon where people are basically reporting things that they see, and now that everyone's looking, there's just going to be more sightings. So that it seems highly credible that this isn't something that's a foreign threat, because otherwise we would be hearing from the Pentagon a lot more about what they're doing about it. Because when you put them in charge, they really like everyone to know that they're in charge.
That they're in charge, yeah, and they're handling it. Well, it's all eyes to the skies right now. I also imagine it's got to be somewhat frustrating to be tasked with writing about this every day, and there's not a whole lot of new revelations or answers. Thanks for watching, everybody. Go to joinnn.com to find new.
Okay, and let's Rad Paul.
Majority Leader.
In a few moments, my friend Senator Peters will offer an amendment that responds to the reports of unusual drone activity, and I thank him for his great work and leadership on this. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bipartisan drone legislation, which the FBI, the DHS, the FAA, and the DOD, the Department of Defense, all support. The Senate should pass.
That could also be a scary thing. That could be scary as well. That could be also very indicative of why you would support it, or you might.
Our bill without delay. Our bill, among other things, explicitly authorizes state and local authorities to conduct drone detection and helps them better coordinate with federal law enforcement agencies to keep communities safe. The people in New York and New Jersey have a lot of questions, and they're not getting good enough answers. The utter confusion surrounding these drone sightings shows that the feds can't respond all on their own. They need help detecting these drones from local officials who have neither the resources nor the explicit authority to act, and the bill fixes that.
That comes from the Pentagon DOD Secretary of Defense. They could do that themselves. They have the authority. They could do something about it. They could do something about it. You're lying.
We all know drones are a relatively new phenomena, and there are millions of them all over the United States. A lot of them are hobbyists, some of them are companies doing legitimate work. But the federal government just doesn't have the ability or resources. If we were to say the federal government should look at this completely, they'd be taken away from so many other important jobs. So the most logical thing to do is say, let the localities have some authority. These are law enforcement authorities. These are people we know and we trust. Now, for all we know, the bill, for all we know, the recent drone incidents are entirely benign. But the people of New York and New Jersey understandably still have questions, and they deserve answers. The problem is the widespread use of drones is relatively new in the eyes of federal law, and therefore the authority to detect drone activity near sensitive infrastructure is totally in federal jurisdiction. And that should be fixed in an appropriate way. The federal government just doesn't have the ability to go in every corner of America and see whether the drones are safe or not.
Yes, they do.
Local law enforcement is appropriate, and they will work with the feds in working on this. The bill is about giving local officials on the ground greater flexibility and proven technology to detect and track threats in their jurisdictions. It's about giving people answers they don't now have, heard directly from authorities on the ground. If this bill becomes law, we will have better clarity in the future. So I yield to my friend from Michigan, who's worked hard on this issue for a long period of time. It has broad bipartisan support. I hope the Senate can act. I yield.
Madam President.
Senator from Michigan.
Madam President, every day, more and more Americans are using drones, from everything from hobby flights to commercial applications, as well as law enforcement activities. Drones can offer important societal and economic benefits, but they can also cause problems if they are not used appropriately. Recently in New Jersey, we've seen reports of loud and menacing drones. And while the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and other key agencies have assured the public that these drones pose no immediate Homeland Security threat, they have certainly caused unease and concern for many Americans. Rogue drones can interfere with commercial air traffic, as we saw with the recent closure of runways at a New York airport, as well as large public gatherings like football games or concerts. The national...
I have to correct him, fact check this guy about these drones, so-called drones. These are ones that cannot be tracked, that were not civilian. There have been a few guys have been arrested for flying their drones and stuff like that. Those were able to be tracked. There's a difference between government or top secret run drones, or what could be ET, UFO. There's a huge difference here. And he's really lying. They're trying to put this on civilians. It's not.
Football League, a key supporter of this legislation, has shared that at recent seasons they have seen more than 2,500 drones violate the airspace around stadiums, and in some cases leading to them stopping the football games to resolve potential threats to their fans as well as to their teams. Yeah. We've also seen how drones operate by a bad actor can quickly become a or a very serious security threat.
Well, they have to worry about copyright infringement. That's one of their biggest issues is copyright infringement. You have all these guys trying to fly drones to get free piece of the pie, free content, or even sell it off, make money for themselves. They have investment to protect as well. That and security, of course, where some people could just lop in bombs from these drones.
Summer, an assailant used a drone to surveil President-elect Trump's rally site in Butler, Pennsylvania, just hours before firing shots in a horrific assassination attempt. And that's why I've been working to pass bipartisan legislation that would address these concerns by giving law enforcement the tools and the authorities that they need to detect, to identify, and track.
Well, they could have done it anyway. They could have shot it down anyway. They had their own authority to do that. They could have done
drones to ensure that they do not pose any risk to Americans. My legislation, which passed out of the committee that I chair, Homeland Security and Government Affairs, passed unanimously last Congress, out of committee, would equip law enforcement agencies, including state and local police, like the officials currently dealing with the ongoing situation in New Jersey, with the tools to better detect and to track drones and identify cases where they may pose a security threat to large public gatherings, airports, critical infrastructure facilities, as well as our communities. Most urgently, this bill would ensure that law enforcement has the technology needed to quickly and clearly identify exactly what the reported sightings of drones across the country actually are. If a drone is found to be a potential danger, our law enforcement agencies, they must have the tools to mitigate these threats effectively. And that's why my bill would allow the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice to operate a pilot program so that state and local law enforcement agencies can conduct drone mitigation activities to safely disable threatening drones before they cause serious harm. This legislation has strong bipartisan support here in the U.S. Senate. We currently have 28 co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle, 14 Democrats, 11 Republicans, and 3 independents. And as the number of registered drones continue to grow, so does the need to pass this critical legislation to ensure that our law enforcement agencies can address these potential.
They already had this. Doesn't address the real problem of what could be UFO government, which this is, which government up for debate. Obviously, a lot of it is also ours as well. Okay, top secret stuff. This stuff is aimed directly at private citizen use of drones, and that hurts the people, the citizens. It just does not hold the government accountable what they're doing and getting away with in this psyop.
Threats. So I urge my colleagues to join me in passing this common sense bill to safeguard our homeland and ensure that law enforcement can better protect our communities from the potential threats posed by recklessly or nefariously operated drones. So I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S. 1631, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration that the Peters substitute amendment, which is at the desk, be considered and agreed to, and the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there an objection?
Madam President,
Senator from Kentucky.
reserving the right to object. No one disputes that drones flying in airspace could be a danger, that drones flying over the Super Bowl could be a danger, that drones flying over our military bases could be a danger. That's why it's illegal. It's currently illegal, and the federal government has the capacity to investigate and stop drones that are in airspace, over our military bases, following our ships. We have that capacity. But what is disputed, and what the Biden administration is currently telling us, is they don't see a problem. So if there is a problem, let the Biden administration be forthcoming. Let us know the extent of the problem. Let us know who's flying the drones, and let us know what's going on. Instead, this bill says, well, we don't know. The Biden administration doesn't know, but why don't we give the power to the local officials to go after drones? But I rise today to object to this unanimous consent request because at the time, public trust in government is in historic lows. This body must not rush to grant sweeping surveillance powers without proper consideration and debate by the committees of jurisdiction, which is what I pledge to do beginning in January when we will be in charge of the committees. Yet what is going on is exactly what this legislation seeks to do now, is to expand federal authority to intercept communications and disrupt drone activity, powers that raise serious concerns for Americans' privacy, civil liberties, and Fourth Amendment protections against unwarranted search and seizure. We are being told this legislation is urgent, that it is needed to address an imminent drone threat, yet the government itself admits no such threat exists. So either there is a threat or there isn't a threat, but the Biden administration keeps saying, well, it's all normal stuff and it's just planes. So it is or it isn't. Why don't we try to get to the truth of the matter of what actually exists and what the threat is before we propose legislation? Federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, have stated clearly that there is no current national security risk, no public safety concern, and no unlawful drone activity requiring intervention. So there either is a problem or there isn't a problem. If there is a problem, let's discuss how to do it while protecting the communications of innocent Americans whose their communications could be caught up in this legislation. until the assessment, the federal assessment changes. The assessment that it isn't a problem changes to that it is a problem, and these are the malefactors. These are the people that are orchestrating this. Let's get that from the Biden administration. Tell us what the problem is. Tell us the extent of the problem. Instead, the Biden administration is saying there's not a problem. So, Madam President, this pattern is all too familiar. History has shown us time and time again how fear and manufactured urgency are used as pretext to expand government power at the expense of freedom. After 9/11, Congress passed the Patriot Act in the name of security. Americans were promised that these surveillance powers were necessary. They would only be directed towards foreigners. They would only be directed towards terrorists until we discovered that these powers were being used on Americans. Americans were promised that these powers were necessary and temporary. Instead, they were abused, misused, and weaponized. Innocent Americans had their privacy violated, their data collected, and their rights trampled.
Right.
The lesson here is clear. When Congress legislates in haste, without careful scrutiny, without debate, and without accountability, it is the American people who suffer the consequences. Today, we are facing a similar moment. The bill before us would grant law enforcement significant authority to intercept private electronic communications without consent. For example, the bill would allow the government to conduct dragnet surveillance of the phones innocent Americans traveling through U.S. airports as long as the government claims they are doing it to neutralize a drone.
Right.
So in order to look at the information that might be coming to a drone, it may be that you capture all the information of everybody surrounding an airport or everybody who lives near an airport. Once you have all that data, what are the assurances that the government isn't looking at your data in addition to the data that may be related to flying the drone? This is not just about security. It's about unchecked government overreach. It's about capitalizing on fear and media-driven hysteria to jam through sweeping legislation that could violate the civil liberties of American people. Congress has a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check on the executive power, not as a rubber stamp for it. The federal government already has the power to deal with drones. The federal government already has the power to stop any drones that are in airspace around airports. The federal government already has the power to protect its air bases. So if there is a significant problem here, the Biden administration needs to come forward and let us know, who are these drones? Who's operating these drones? What is the federal government doing to protect either airports or bases from this? Instead, we are told by the Biden administration there is no threat to our national security. So let's first insist on truth and transparency from the Biden administration before offering up legislation that is feel-good, pat somebody on the back and say, oh, we've done something about drones. We are strong on drones. Congress has a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check on executive power, not as a rubber stamp. We owe it to the American people to demand compelling justification, meaningful safeguards, and full transparency before granting any new surveillance authorities. We are a nation of laws, not fear, not panic, and not manufactured urgency. We do not trade away our freedoms, our privacy, and our constitutional protections for vague promises of security. I will object to this bill today, but I am open to talking with the authors of this bill about how we could have enhanced ability to interrupt drone activity, but done while protecting all Americans' constitutional right to privacy.
And lastly,
you want to know what is most and least likely when it comes to what's happening with the drones? Good, because I've got the guy for you today. Chris Cuomo here at the Chris Cuomo Project. Luis Elizondo. This is a man who is not a hobbyist. He does not exist only on social media. He has worked and been a warrior for America on the field of battle and in the field of intelligence and counterintelligence. Multiple administrations, left, right, but always reasonable. He has done the job many different ways. He is also known as the man who had the balls, the ganas, as they would say in Espanol, to go before Congress and say, you are not being told what is known by agencies and programs in government about what is going on in the air and in the world around us. And that's why I rely on him so highly. He is a man of complete integrity. He knows what he knows what he doesn't know, and he is straight about the same. So you want to know what has proof and what is poppycock when it comes to drones? Luis Elizondo is a man. And he is also the man when it comes to having this conversation. And I learned a lot, and I hope you do as well.
I think what you want about Chris Cuomo and his affiliation with CNN, stuff like that, but he's had some good stuff on his newscasts with different topics from politics to really this UFO stuff, UAP, drone stuff. So I get my information way I want to get, from what I know, put things together and come up with answers and stuff like that. It's how we're really supposed to do it. And everything, get from different sides, stuff like that. Always go by what we know and what we see ourselves. And everything.
Luis, thank you very much. Good to have you as always. Appreciate the relationship.
Yeah, Chris, my honor and privilege to be with you and your wonderful audience.
So to remind people will recognize you from having testified in Congress. Why did you do that?
Well, because I think we need to bring truth and transparency to the American people, something that, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but this current administration has forgotten.
Do you believe that this administration is different in regard to being closed-mouthed about UAPs?
I know they are. Unfortunately, I have friends on the inside that were at meetings when the conversation was brought up at the National Security Council, the same one, by the way, that said 30 days before a horrendous attack in Israel that the Middle East has never been safer. Anyways, long story short, anytime the topic of UAP came up, they were told to stand down and not discuss it. And I think that's probably part of the reason why we are in the situation we're in now, because anything in the sky that isn't identified immediately is what we call a UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And drones included, and balloons and anything else. And of course, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the really, truly exotic. But at the end of the day, we don't have really good cognizance of what's in our airspace. We don't have complete air domain awareness. And it's getting to the point now where there's air safety issues. Let's not forget, they literally had to close down Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for a while because of these incursions of these drones or UAP. Most people, I think, agree that they're drones, but there's still some people that say, look, what we're seeing doesn't look like a drone, doesn't act like a drone. So I think the jury is still out to some degree on what exactly these are.
Well, look, in a vacuum of transparency and information from the power source, people get sideways and susceptible. What's the old expression? When people are desperate for answers, the answers get more and more desperate. Now,
that's right.
To also give people context about why I rely on you as heavily as I do, give people just the flavor of why you would have the honor flag over your shoulder and all of the numerous affinity patches.
The short answer is because I'm old. I've been around a long time. I was kind of like that kid in the old generation. Your older generation folks might remember this. Mikey from the Life cereal commercial, right? If anybody, the kids didn't want to eat any cereal, they gave it to Mikey and he'd eat anything. That was kind of like me in my career. Every job that nobody wanted, somehow I wound up taking it. So I am a career-long intelligence officer and special agent in counterintelligence. Most of my focus has been in counterterrorism, counterespionage, counter-narcotics, and counterinsurgency operations. I'm not a science fiction guy. I went to school into the medical program, and I studied microbiology and immunology. I am a disciple of the scientific methodology and principles. But later on in my career, when I left an element within the intelligence community, came back to the Department of Defense for a little while, that's when I was brought into a program where I learned the reality that your tax dollars, the American tax dollars, are being used to study UAP and quite aggressively, frankly. And I think the American public would be shocked to learn just how often these incursions are occurring over controlled U.S. airspace, over sensitive military installations, and even over our nuclear equities.
Give a little bit of depth and context to that for people. What kinds of incursions, how often, and what is the reason that they are not aware or not able to stop or not willing to admit?
Yeah, wow. Let me unpack a lot of that there. So, to the surprise of many, the U.S. government has been investigating UAP, or unidentified anomalous phenomenon, or
UFOs.
in the vernacular, UFO, for
UFOs.
decades. Despite the public posturing that we don't look at these things are silly, tinfoil hats and whatnot, the truth of the matter is we've been looking at these things for a very long time, for decades. And what sets these things aside from anything else, let's say like quadcopters, or let's say conventional explanations like balloons, like we saw a few years ago, there's 5 performance characteristics that separate truly anomalous UAP from anything that we have in our current inventory. And we learned this when I was in the program. The program was called ATIP. It was at the Pentagon. It stood for the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and it was a program to investigate UFOs, or now what we call UAP. And we found a lot. And a lot of folks now probably look back and they remember the famous Nimitz video, and then the Roosevelt incident videos, and the gimbal video, and Go Fast. Those all came as a result of our program that we were running at the Pentagon. And there was a lot of things there that we saw that really were quite perplexing. And to put the case in point here and emphasize what you're saying, what makes these things stand out, look different, and behave different, it's these 5 characteristics, right? You have vehicles. When you look at a human being, for example, Chris, we can experience for a very short period of time 9 G-forces on the human body on average before we start suffering medical consequences like blackouts and redouts and ultimately death. And that's why our pilots wear G-suits. And in comparison to one of our very best, most highly maneuverable manned aircraft, it's older, but it's still one of the most highly maneuverable manned aircraft. That's the General Dynamics F-16. And that can handle at the unclassified level probably about 16 to 17 G-forces before you start having structural failure, meaning the aircraft begins to disintegrate while you're flying it. What we are seeing are objects that are performing in excess of 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000 G-forces. So well beyond the healthy limitations of anything biologically to withstand, and certainly beyond the structural engineering limitations from an aerospace perspective that we know how to make. Also, to put that in comparison, another observable is hypersonic velocity. That is the speeds at 5 times the speed of sound. Now, do we have vehicles that can do that? We do, sure. For example, the Lockheed YF-12A SR-71, the Blackbird that everybody talks about, that can push about 3,200 miles an hour right there at the edge of Mach 5. But when it wants to take a right-hand turn, Chris, it takes roughly half the state of Ohio to do that. Yeah. And what we are seeing are vehicles that are not doing 3,500 miles an hour, but in some cases 10,000, 13,000 miles an hour in a low Earth atmosphere environment, and they're able to execute immediate right-angle turns and 180-degree turns. So these are some examples. Another one's low observability, which we're now seeing with these drones. Another one is transmedium travel, the ability to operate in multiple domains to include atmosphere, underwater, and even outer space. Right. Those type of technologies that we have been seeing for many years now at the Pentagon and with the intelligence community is taken very seriously within certain circles inside the U.S. government. The problem is the messaging and the communication to the people and to Congress and even to the president at times is very disjointed. And so now we have the situation we have now where you have local and state law enforcement officials literally recording these drones, these vehicles on their phone. And you have, on the other hand, a White House statement coming from John Kirby saying things that these are all prosaic and these are all manned aircraft and are all legally there. If that's the case, then why would you shut down Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, right? The answer is that it's not. These things are not being coordinated with U.S. government. It's a complete mystery, Chris, and it's a problem.
What's the best sense that you developed about where they're coming from and who has them?
Wow. Well, there's several scenarios. One is, I think now it's gaining some popularity and traction. Again, let me emphasize, in the absence of information, right? So now we're leaving people to speculate. You have drones being flown at night, which is very atypical. Usually do that when you don't want people to notice you too much. Some of these have been described as being bigger than an automobile or an SUV. So, Chris, that's a substantial drone, right? This is not a quadcopter that's being used at Amazon or Pizza Hut to deliver a pizza.
It's not a typical recreational application. You can't find them online for purchase.
That's correct. No, we're talking at least government sponsored, because now you're talking about loiter capability using a battery, by the way, right? Not liquid fuel like gasoline that weighs a lot, but a battery where these things are staying aloft for, in some cases, more than 5, 6, even 10 hours at a time, and able to traverse a really long distance. Now, if you look at that compared to common drones, normal drones, conventional drones, they have a lifespan of maybe airtime total 15, 20 minutes before they come down and run out of battery. And they're only line of sight because you're using radio frequency to control them. If you want to go beyond line of sight, Chris, you need to have a really sophisticated infrastructure. You need either an aircraft to bounce and relay that system, or you need a satellite. And that takes manpower, it takes money, it takes time and attention. So this would be something either, at the end of the day, I think there's only two options if they're drones. One is they are foreign adversarial drones, which I don't think that's a possibility, because you have to recover these things, you have to maintain them, then you have to deploy them again. Logistically, I just don't buy it. It'll be way too difficult. The other option is that there are drones, if there are drones, and there's two reasons that they could be being used. One is you have a significant threat situation. Think of a broken arrow situation where there is some sort of WMD, whether radiological, chemical, or even biological, that has somehow been nefariously placed here in the continental United States or around sensitive military installations. So what would our response be? Typically, in the old days, we'd fly up a couple helicopters, but there's a response time there, and frankly, helicopters are limited in what they can do. It's much easier to send up 5 drones. You can have something geotagged. If there's for example, something coming into your perimeter, these things can automatically launch and do what you need them to do. So in this case, you could imagine our drones being used by the Department of Energy, maybe loaned out by the Department of Defense or DHS or someone else, maybe a government contractor, with sniffers, with the electronic capability to detect trace amounts of radiation or biological or chemical weapons. And that's a scenario that would certainly make sense. The problem is you're not seeing the typical reaction you would see from the special operations world. Folks like JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, and SOCOM, tier 1 organizations that would definitely be ready to go and be on some sort of retrieval basis should they find something.
That's an important cover point. So I ran down that road because of the New Jersey report that something was missing, and got this entire education and how often this happens, how insignificant this medical rod is or whatever it is, and how they get stolen or misplaced. And just because we say radioactive doesn't mean what I would think it would mean from the movies or whatever. Yeah. And the point that you're making now, which is you wouldn't be using just drones. You wouldn't be doing it at night. You would be all out and having all kinds of ground and interactivity within law enforcement if they were looking for something like a WMD or something like that.
They would.
And I haven't had anybody give me any reason to believe that that's what this is that's good. They can't tell me what it is in the alternative, but they say, look, I work on this kind of stuff about tracking nukes and stuff, and this is not what it would look like.
Yeah, so you would have folks from the National Counterproliferation Center, NCPC, folks from NCTC, National Counterterrorism Center. Everybody would be up in arms on this thing and would be trying to find whatever this is, if that was a scenario. So I tend to agree with you. There's another scenario here that has been brought up and frankly can't be dismissed as remote as a possibility as this may be. In the words of Sherlock Holmes, once you have done the deductive reasoning and you have eliminated all other possibilities, what you have left over has to be it. Now, this is simply a speculation based upon what some of the data is suggesting. So I just want to make sure I caveat that. But there are some people who are saying that these drones are silent, that some of these drones are significantly much bigger than an SUV, and that the lights that they see, the strobe lights, they are not in the same frequency or order or even color as common navigational lights that you would expect, let's say, on a Cessna 172 or a helicopter, police helicopter. And so what I've been told by some, and again, let me caveat here, this is complete speculation. I cannot say this is happening or not. But there are some people who have reported that these things are coming out of the water and they're
Right.
zipping off away at
I've
fantastical
seen and
speeds.
heard
If that's
that.
the case, what we may have here is a confused public. We might have some people reporting true UAP events, followed by a
UFO.
Department of Defense response by launching drones to go ahead and try to find these UAPs. In the old days, when you had a sensitive military installation or a Department of Energy facility and you had an incursion across a perimeter, you would usually send up a helicopter. But that requires having to wake up a pilot and starting the helo and getting it started and flying it.
Take a
Now
couple
we have the
hours, an
technology
hour.
to literally geofence a facility, and if something comes across, automatically these drones deploy to
couple hours.
their pre-planned coordinates and start doing the racetrack mapping back and forth, which some of these drones appear to be doing. They just kind of go back in this lazy racetrack, back and forth, scanning for something. There is some anecdotal videos. They'd have to be analyzed to see if they're legit or not. But some of these show traditional drones trying to intercept, some of the videos now online, intercept some of these lights.
Project.
And they wind up getting shut down and falling out of the sky. And meanwhile, the big set of lights just kind of disappears, as been reported by some law enforcement. Still too early right now to speculate if that's the case. It's certainly an option. Then there's also some other options that if for some reason some government contractor is trying to get some attention on how effective their drones are, I guess they could, in contravention of the law and violating local laws and federal laws, do a show of force, demonstrate the capabilities of these drones. Let's not forget, Chris, drones are very serious business right now. We a lot of our neighbors' kids have them, they fly them around, but the reality is all you have to do is look at Ukraine right now and look how these things are being weaponized. And they're being weaponized to a great effect. Can you imagine if that was happening over here? And this is, I think, my issue with the current administration. Mm-hmm. What if some non-state actor decided to take these drones, put a bunch of chemicals and crap on them, fly them over populated U.S. areas, and now our administration is saying, well, we don't know what they are, we don't know where they're from, we don't know who's flying them, but don't worry, take it from us, they're no threat. That doesn't work. Mm-hmm. I don't understand that logic. You know, you go to an airport or a train station today, and all you hear is, if you see something, say something. And yet when it comes to these drones or UAP, it's kind of the reverse. It's kind of the opposite perspective.
I think you guys have a culture of denying information that either you don't want people to have.
Anyways, guys, check this out. Chris Cuomo Project. I just wanted to get this out there. Luis Elizondo, who's from ATIP, looked at classified UFO stuff. They related it to UAP. The government always changes the acronyms to what when they investigate ETs or anomalous craft or anomalies in the atmosphere type anomalies, whether it's ETs or non-ETs. They change the stupid acronyms because they don't want people to know that they're investigating this stuff. They like to have it covered up, not acknowledge this. So, anyways, tell me what you think. Leave a like and take care. Have a great day.